and welcome to Your Coaching Journey, a podcast for doctors about coaching. Whether you're a coaching doctor, a doctor who is learning to coach, or a doctor who'd like to build coaching into your professional life, then this is the podcast for you.
Hi, I'm Helen Leathers, and with me today is my co-host and business partner, Tom Dillon. Good morning, Tom. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Helen. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Very good.
I was very loud then, wasn't I?
You were very loud. What are we talking about today, Tom?
Today, I thought we'd expand on our previous podcast where we've looked at emotions in coaching. And I thought we'd explore a topic that might come into coaching, which is emotional intelligence.
Okay.
Now, I don't think anyone's ever going to turn up and go, oh, I'd like to talk about emotional intelligence. My emotional intelligence isn't where it ought to be. But there are elements of emotional intelligence that people might want talking about. And actually, within an organizational context, people might be asked to have some coaching around, could do with improving his emotional intelligence.
Have you had that before?
Well, certainly I've done work in that space, yes. So, and it could just be around his communication style is unhelpful.
Okay, so they might not say he's not very emotionally intelligent.
Well,
it seems a bit judgy.
Well, yeah, but saying someone's communication style is not effective, or organisations have these ways of assessing people, don't they?
Okay, so I think emotional intelligence is something that most of our listeners will have heard about. I think it's quite often said that EQ is more important than IQ. But how are we defining emotional
It's funny, is that it's weird that EQ has come to be shorthand for emotional intelligence.
Yeah, it's weird.
Because it obviously comes from IQ, and that was intelligence quotient, wasn't it? So It was Mensa measuring your intelligence in some weird way. So there was a measure for it. No, you can't measure emotional intelligence. So there is no emotional quotient.
No, there's not.
So I don't know why that became a thing, but it did. Anyway, so EQ.
But equally, I also read something recently about the idea that people think you can be intelligent without being emotionally intelligent, and that's not always shown to be the case.
Oh, I think it depends, doesn't it? Yes. And I love that question that has become a thing to ask school children. Rather than saying, how intelligent are you? How are you intelligent? Because there are different intelligences, aren't there, that we might have. So you might have someone who is very, very intelligent. Academics, notoriously lacking in emotional intelligence. To any academics out there, sorry. It's a sweeping generalization, bit of a stereotype. But I think that's, people with brains the size of a planet who struggle to communicate.
I think that was my point. The thing that I read was that actually there is a correlation where people who have high intelligence also have equally high emotional intelligence. But I can't remember where I read it.
I think I was arguing the opposite.
Yeah, you were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Funny.
I can't remember my source, so I can't back it up.
Yeah. Oh, you asked me how we're defining emotional intelligence.
I did. We went off on a tangent.
Yeah. So I think in terms of a definition, it's really the ability to recognise, understand and manage our own emotions, and recognise, understand and respond to the emotions of others. They talk about managing others, but we can't manage other people's emotions. So, being able to respond effectively to someone else's emotions.
And it strikes me that this also feeds into other things that we've probably done before, which is things like the cognitive behavioural coaching, where obviously that's a lot about cognition and thinking, but emotions come into that. Yeah. As well.
Yeah, lots of the approaches that we take on our transformational coaching diploma will have some connection with emotional intelligence. So yes, so just a bit about the origins of it as a topic for discussion. So it was the term was coined by a master's student master's or doctoral student called Wayne Payne. What a lovely name, Wayne Payne. Who thought it? What was his parents thinking? Wayne Payne.
I am
yes
for words.
So that was back in a dissertation he wrote in 1985, but that was a much narrower idea of emotional intelligence than we think of now. And then Peter Salovey and John Mayer were the first academics to really study it from 1990. And then Daniel Goleman was the one that kind of brought it to popular attention. So he wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence in 1994. So that was when it started to become a thing and organizations latched onto it. Everyone wanted their people to be emotionally intelligent. And there's another guy, Reuven Bar-On, who developed his own model. So that was 1997. So there are competing models, competing theories around it, but they're all more or less talking about the same thing. So today we're going to focus on Daniel Goleman's model, which is, say, the most popular version of emotional intelligence.
Okay, so what does that model look like?
Well, interestingly, he's had a few iterations of it over the years. So back in 1994, it started off with 5 different domains. So self-awareness, self-management, motivation, empathy, and social skills. So that's was where he started. And then since 2013, he's kind of it's bizarre. He's narrowed it down to just be 4 domains. So self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. But if we dig below the surface of that, he's now got 12 different competencies that sit underneath those 4 areas. So really, he's kind of tried to simplify it, but made it far more complex.
I noticed it's sort of taking out the motivation, and that does seem like a very distinct topic in and of itself.
Yes.
So I understand how that's sort of been removed from.
Yeah, I didn't really understand why it was there. Other than, obviously, when we talked about motivation on our podcast, there is an emotional element to why you do things, what your motivation is for doing things. So within self-awareness, there's one competency that spans all of the 4 domains, and that's he calls focus, but quite often refers to as attention. So I would say that's probably flow. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's concept of flow, that's what he's talking about, is if we can be in that space of really paying attention and getting lost in our world, that's a good thing to be. And that sits across all 4 dimensions.
Okay.
But then self-awareness is just self-awareness. It doesn't have anything else other than focus sitting in that domain, which is weird because, again, you'd think there'd be different parts of self-awareness. You might. And obviously we're talking about emotional self-awareness. So you'd think, tricky.
Yeah.
And then when we get on self-management, we've got emotional balance, adaptability, achievement orientation, and a positive outlook. In social awareness, we've got empathy and organizational awareness. Now, so they say there, we've got organizational awareness. So one of his competencies suggests that you're in an organization. So almost like unless you're in an organization, emotional intelligence doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But if we think about that as maybe systemic awareness.
Yes.
We did our podcast recently about systemic coaching. So being aware of the environment and being aware of the social, cultural influences that your environment has on you. Relationship management is the 4th domain. And that includes influencing, coaching and mentoring. Interestingly, he's brought that into the world of emotional intelligence, but not as a competency. So if you are able to coach and mentor people around their emotional intelligence, that would be helpful.
This is a very complex model, and I'm kind of sitting there thinking...
He simplified it. There's just 4 domains. It's simple.
So is he saying someone who can't coach or mentor can't have emotional intelligence to the same level as someone who
Well,
can?
I guess when you've got 13 competencies, you would measure people on their competencies, wouldn't you? So if in an organizational structure, if you were training people around emotional intelligence, you might teach them to coach and mentor as well. But that bit is about relationship management. And as we know, the ability to coach is probably, the skills you learn when you're learning to coach probably help in that relationship management. What else does it say? Conflict management, teamwork, and inspirational leadership. So we're back to that point of, okay, we're only talking about emotional intelligence if you're a leader. And you have to be inspirational. So,
I'm feeling some resistance to this.
are you?
I am. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because this is not a model I've delved into in any great depth, but I'm feeling a bit of resistance. Maybe it just means I need to study it more. But this is kind of my first foray into it. So let's see where we go with it.
Yeah. So I think
So there's 13 competencies.
13 competencies. Yeah. Yeah. So if we explore them in a bit more detail. So let's start with the self-awareness. So that's your ability to recognize and understand your own emotions, your thoughts, your behaviors. So understanding why you do the things that you do and think the way that you think and feel the way you feel. And how that's going to affect yourself and how you navigate the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then also how that impacts on other people as well.
So that's all one domain.
Yeah, I say focus, attention fits into that one as well, but that's the only element that he has fitting into self-awareness.
So on the face of it, a very simple level to throw out there as a label, if you like, but it's actually quite a complex area, isn't it?
Yeah. Like we know, don't we? That part of the work we do as coaches is increasing someone's self-awareness, asking questions that do that. And people are not very self-aware, are they?
No, and I think the work that we do on ourselves, and
It's taken us years
yes,
to become slightly more self-aware than we used to be.
Exactly. So we haven't really got time to explore that because it is such a huge topic. So let's just say that's the first domain.
Yeah, but if you think
self-awareness.
about it from a coaching perspective, then obviously self-awareness is a huge part of what we do in the coaching.
Yes,
helping
absolutely.
people to understand why they think, feel, and do the things they do. So I think we can take that that's going to be part and parcel of our coaching anyway.
Yeah. So if we think about the next domain, which is self-management.
Yes, so it's 4 areas within that. So emotional balance, so that ability to regulate and manage your emotions. So keeping some emotional stability and well-being, even if you're facing sort of challenging times or facing stress. So again, that's part of our coaching offering, isn't it? That we will help people to navigate stress, look after their own well-being, all of that stuff. What's always funny when I think about emotional intelligence, no one ever talks about emotions in emotional intelligence.
No.
I never hear Daniel Goleman talk about specific emotions. He talks about stress and conflict management, but it doesn't really talk about, it's an odd concept, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting because actually I think when we talked about emotions on the podcast previously, we said one of the things you could do is to help improve your relationship with emotions and therefore effectively your emotional intelligence is to understand all the different types of emotions that there might be and the nuances of
So have some emotional literacy.
That-
And he doesn't seem to, that's not a competency, emotional literacy. I think he ought to have that in.
I think we need to write a new model of emotional intelligence.
But anyway, so that's emotional balance. Then adaptability, so that ability to adjust your thoughts, behaviors and emotions as circumstances change, new information comes up, challenges come along. So that sort of thing. So as being flexible, open to change. And again, I think he comes at it from an organizational perspective. So he's thinking about, personal and professional growth, how that, so I think it is very, almost management based as a model.
Yeah.
But he's been writing those sorts of management books since 1994. So steeped in that. How long is that? 31 years, isn't it? Gosh. Yeah. So achievement orientation. So refers to the drive to set and achieve goals with a focus on excellence. And again, that's what organizations want you to do, isn't it?
Yeah. And suggests that you can't be emotionally intelligent if you're not going for these goals.
Yes. So also look, continuous improvement and personal growth are in there as well as part of that achievement orientation. So that's definitely something we'll be working with in coaching. And we're not saying that excellence isn't a good thing, but it's not the be all and end all of it.
No. We've discussed that before, haven't we? So,
And then the last element of that domain is positive outlook. So the ability to remain optimistic and have a constructive perspective. So
Now that's interesting.
mm,
And again, I would challenge that a little bit.
it's been very challenging this
I
morning.
know we've always got
Poor
a
old Danny.
reversal here, haven't we?
Danny boy.
So the studies that I've made of positive psychology does refer to pessimism, optimism and realism. And that if someone has a naturally optimistic or pessimistic outlook on life, that's part of their personality. And there are strengths and weaknesses in both of those. And what this is almost saying is the positive outlook will determine how emotionally intelligent you are. And again, by default, if you have a pessimistic outlook, you might be really great at planning for worst case scenarios and that kind of thing. But this suggests that you couldn't then have a higher sort of emotional intelligence level. And I'm not sure that that's the case.
Good challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe he'll come on our podcast and answer these questions for us. What do you think?
Yeah, but again, I think it relates to organizations, and obviously within an organization, you want people to be optimistic, don't you? Find ways to overcome their challenges.
But the optimistic people don't do that. They just think everything's going to work out for the best. It's the pessimists that plan for things.
Well, realistic optimism.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, again, still feeling the resistance to this model.
Although, as Tali Shara says, optimistic people always feel better no matter what happens.
Yes.
Because they attribute their successes to their own endeavours and attribute their failures to circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they'll feel better.
According to the Danny boy, they're more emotionally intelligent.
Yes.
Okay. So that's self-awareness, that's self-management. And I think social awareness was the third domain. What does that include?
Yeah, so that's just got two competencies, empathy and organisational awareness. And obviously within the coaching room, we are thinking about empathy and the different types of empathy. And he has, well, interestingly, rather than weirdly, he has cognitive empathy as a form of empathy, emotional empathy. So cognitive empathy is that ability to understand why someone else might think and feel the way they do.
Yeah.
Emotional empathy is feeling the feelings with them. So
Yeah.
you go to that place of emotion. Empathic concern or what's that word? Compassion is another one. So that kind of wanting to take action to ease someone's suffering. And then social empathy. So he sees all of those as integral to the overall empathy. And what we have in coaching, really that cognitive empathy, understanding why someone thinks that way, and then demonstrated empathy of reflecting back, holding that space for someone, letting them know you're with them. He doesn't talk about that at all.
No, he doesn't.
But he does talk about social empathy, so understanding perhaps why a group of people might think and feel the way they do, so their emotional response to something that's going on. So maybe within an organisation, if there's a restructure, why one team might all be up in arms because something's happening.
Interesting.
So so that's not really something I've explored before, social empathy, but interesting. So then the other element to that, the other half of that is organisational awareness. So that's the ability to understand and navigate the organisational dynamics. So that would include the culture, the politics, the motivations, the values, the purpose of the organisation.
Yeah.
And again, being able to communicate with people around that in an effective manner. So it is, as a model, is very much, and he runs a course on emotional intelligence, but it's very much for how you navigate an organisational space. And almost, what an organisation would want you to be doing if you were demonstrating emotional intelligence.
So what about the fourth dimension then?
So the fourth dimension was relationship management. And obviously that's the ability to manage interactions and relationships. And that has 5 competencies. So influencing, so the ability to shape the decisions, behaviours and attitudes of others. And fostering cooperation, respect and shared goals. So with that, I guess that would include persuasion, negotiation. That would be part of that. Trust building, inspiring, motivating others. All of that and obviously maintaining healthy relationships.
Interesting.
Yeah. What thoughts do you have?
I think let's carry on with the rest of the areas, and then I'm going to reflect.
Okay. So the next one is coaching and mentoring. So within his model, it's recognised that both coaching and mentoring can play an important role in fostering emotional intelligence, helping people. And I think as coaches, we do great work in helping people to improve their emotional intelligence, increasing their self-awareness, perhaps thinking about how they manage relationships. I think he's right. I wouldn't necessarily put it in there as a competency for being emotionally intelligent.
I think I would perhaps put listening to others and communication and coaching and or mentoring potentially, but certainly coaching as a tool that sits outside of this model to help encourage emotional intelligence.
Yeah. Then conflict management, and obviously that's the ability to navigate disputes, disagreements in a constructive way, and again, maintaining those positive relationships. Which again, I think all stems from an organisational wanting everyone to get along and play nicely and collaborate but part of conflict management is that you don't necessarily come to agreement. No deal is an option, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that's, I think we're not always going to get to a place of everyone being happy in negotiations.
No.
So teamwork was the next competency in that domain. So effective teamwork, building strong collaborative relationships. Just being productive, positive and supportive of others in your team. And then inspirational leadership. So that ability to inspire and motivate others to achieve a shared vision. So you can see all of that kind of relates to organizations, really, doesn't it?
It does. And for me, do you remember when we were talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you said that there was an element of Maslow kind of reflecting about the people around him, and there was a bit of a privilege to sitting in that upper space of the hierarchy. And to me, it feels like this latter part of his model lends itself more to a certain personality type. I'm still feeling the resistance, is what I'm going to say. And I'm feeling like I might need to create my own emotional intelligence model here.
I think it's a model for his audience. So it's mainly talking to organizational learning and development people that are sold on that concept of that EQ is more important than IQ.
I'm going to keep the thought in my head that I've used before, which is all models are wrong and some are useful.
No, and I think it is a useful model, and I've used it a lot over the years. But if you strip it back to those 4 domains, self-awareness.
Yeah.
Definitely
on board with that.
Self-awareness. If we're going to be emotionally intelligent, we need to be aware of our responses, our reactions, and be able to do the next thing, which is self-management. So, that Viktor Frankl idea of between the stimulus and the response is a gap, and what we just do in that gap gives us our freedom. So that just being able to manage our emotions and our emotional response is really important.
Yeah, I'm on board with that, definitely.
And having social awareness, so some empathy, but also some awareness of cultural differences, some awareness of personality differences, and within an organization, awareness of political dynamics as well. Because, I think you could go into an organization very naively thinking, well, everyone gets on, it's all fine, and very quickly fall foul of internal politics that people aren't necessarily being honest and straightforward with you, Anna. Ulterior motives.
Yeah.
So I think it is important to have that social awareness, and then to be able to manage relationships. And a lot of the work that comes my way in the coaching room is about relationships and how people are struggling with relationships. So definitely some of the work that I'm doing all of the time is around relationship management.
Yeah.
But going back to the self-awareness piece of how are you viewing this situation? And what if we change that perspective and look at it from a different angle, and maybe look at it from the other person's perspective? What impact does that have on the way that you manage your own emotions, but on the way then that you manage that relationship and see things from their perspective?
Yeah, I think I can safely say I'm on board with that high level concept of those 4 domains.
Well, let's leave it there.
I think the deeper stuff, I've got some challenges around, but I think that combined with the emotional literacy that we talked about is probably really useful. So why is emotional intelligence important in coaching then, Tom?
I think for the reasons that we've just said. I think it's a lot of the work that we're doing within the coaching room is going to be around the way someone thinks and feels about situations and the way they're behaving, which is definitely, if we can increase their self-awareness, that's going to help. If it is about the way that they're behaving, in cognitive behavioral coaching, we have the ABCDE model. So the belief someone has about a situation is going to impact the way they behave. And if we can just change that, if we can tweak the way they're looking at it, dispute some of those beliefs, then that can have a big impact on how they then move forward. So that definitely, it's going to be there, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't really, even if it's around individual behavior change, having some self-awareness of why they're struggling to make the change, and that could be around emotions that are involved or beliefs that are involved. So that self-awareness piece again is going to come to the fore. And then some self-management. If it's about behavior change, well, how do you overcome those times when you plan to go for a run, but you don't really feel like it? What happens then? But also navigating your social space, having that social awareness of understanding why what's going on is going on, and being able to manage having some influence on that. I think the influencing part is interesting because I think some people would view it with skepticism and say, well, it's a bit Machiavellian. We're talking about, it's a dark art, influencing others, getting them to do what you want them to do. I think it was Eisenhower who said that leadership is about getting people to do what you want them to do because they want to do it. That was the quote.
Yeah.
So it's that.
Yeah, which seems a bit, it seems very manipulative and, like you say, on that dark art side.
But that's a very cynical view of it. And we're all influencing all of the time, aren't we?
Yeah.
We all have our own agendas and we'll influence other people to get what we want, have our needs met. So I think it's a fascinating topic, and I say we're only really skimming the surface here, but I think it's definitely something that it's useful to have an awareness of in the coaching room.
So moving on from having that awareness, how can we then as coaches integrate emotional intelligence into our work?
Well, I think that self-awareness piece will be there anyway, and the self-management. I think demonstrating emotional intelligence ourselves is going to, it's very unlikely as a coach that we are not going to be demonstrating emotional intelligence.
One would hope.
And I suppose that confidence to hold the space comes with experience. But I remember having a coaching conversation with someone who had some 360 feedback, some multi-source feedback. And the way that it worked, I would get a copy of the report, I'd read it, I'd then show up for a coaching session, and it would be the first time the coachee would see the report. So I'm sitting there whilst they read through their report. And the first part of the report is scores of competencies and how well they're doing. And this guy's boss had scored him very low. So on a scale of 1 to 5, he was getting 1s and 2s from his boss.
Right.
And he looked at it and looked at the first page, and it was about a 30-page report. And he said, I'm getting angry just reading that first page. I said, okay, well, let's talk about that. And he's I want him down here now. I said, okay, that's not going to happen, but let's have a conversation. And so he was upset that he didn't feel he'd been given that message by his boss, and his boss was using the report to tell him things that he wasn't prepared to say to his face.
Yeah.
So was getting very angry in the room. And part of my role as the coach was to help him understand where that emotion was coming from. But then we actually talked about emotional intelligence and how he could demonstrate some emotional intelligence in addressing his displeasure with his boss in a way that was constructive and wasn't him going in there all guns blazing and shouting and screaming about it.
And physical assault charge.
Which he did.
Yeah. Good.
So you could say that maybe as a coach, I was acting in the organisation's interest in stopping that from happening. I mean, I didn't stop it, but I kind of felt that it was good to have that conversation beforehand. So I think it's going to come up. And I think as a model, you could share the model with someone and say, if we think about emotional intelligence, there are these 4 dimensions to it. You don't have to go into all of the competencies, but I think most people would recognise that self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and then relationship management are 4 useful things to be able to do.
Yeah.
To have some capability around.
So we can explore those domains, how people feel about them. And we talk about sort of self-management. So bringing in emotional regulation techniques to the coaching space.
Definitely. Yeah. So back to our CBC stuff and maybe some mindfulness, that sort of thing, to help people with their emotional regulation.
Yeah. And that might be where if someone doesn't have that knowledge, that we might share that knowledge and see how useful it is for them to calm themselves and to take a moment, take a breath.
Yeah, and if we took a Gestalt approach, we might be doing that sort of somatic work about, okay, what was the emotion that comes up for you, and where are you feeling that emotion in your body? What's that actually feel like? And just, again, getting people to be more aware of what's going on for them.
Yeah. And then exploring perhaps when that happens in the situation where it's not helpful, how can we regulate that and calm it down, activate the parasympathetic nervous system.
So maybe some breathing.
Yeah.
Well, we talked about breathing the other day when we were in London, and what Tottenham Court Road, is it Tottenham Court Road Tube Station, had a big screen where they were getting people to breathe in front of it.
It was very relaxing, wasn't it? The big images of almost like a planet or the sun or something like that, and clouds and...
So going back to golf track again.
Yeah.
So going back to this then, so emotional regulation techniques, as you say, so maybe breathing, maybe movement, all sorts of ways that we might do that. Getting them to think about other people's perspectives. So again, a bit of a Gestalt, changing the perspective that someone has, maybe some transactional analysis work on looking at the relationship and how other people are showing up and what their response is to that.
Maybe the scarf model would be used.
Scarf model too, a bit of neuroscience in there as well. So and I'd say for us as coaches, just to be able to demonstrate that emotional intelligence of holding the space for someone and just sitting and listening, which, if we can do that, if people take that message away from coaching that sitting and listening is a good thing to do, then I think their emotional intelligence, their EQ would go up tremendously.
Yeah, and I certainly think that people who I know who have had coaching and also counselling and therapy, I tend to notice that they have an improved sense of emotional intelligence.
Yeah. Good.
So I think this has been a really interesting exploration into emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. It's something that I've worked with for as long as I've been coaching.
Yeah.
And I've run workshops on emotional intelligence, and we tend to go more into emotions and fight or flight response and all of that sort of stuff. That getting people out of the sympathetic nervous system response. But yeah, so I think as a model, as an introduction to emotional intelligence, that was a good place to start.
Yeah, some of it.
It was a good place for me to start.
And it was a good place for me to bring a bit of challenge, which is normally your role.
Yeah, it wasn't our challenging in coaching session this time. That's in a couple of sessions' time. But next time on the podcast, we will be interviewing another one of our coaching doctors, Dr. Joe Hacking.
Yes.
Is our next interview.
Yes.
So, yeah, look forward to that. And we will see you next time. Thank you for now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.